Some people leave your life and quietly fade into memory. Others dig their claws in so deep that even after the breakup, they try to stay relevant. My ex? He belonged in the latter category, and if there's one thing I've learned from surviving that man, it's that nothing infuriates a narcissist more than watching you be happy without them, especially if you're standing at the altar about to marry someone who actually loves you. So of course he tried to ruin it, but I made sure he'd never be able to twist my life, or his image, the same way again. Let's rewind. I dated Ethan for 3 years, and for most of that time I was completely under his spell. He was charming in that too good to be true kind of way. The kind of guy who knew exactly what to say to make you feel special, important, chosen. He'd show up at my office with flowers on a random Tuesday, make candlelit dinners when I had a rough week, send handwritten notes, just because. Everyone said we looked perfect together. Behind closed doors? It was a different story. Ethan had a way of making me feel small without ever raising his voice. He'd joke about my appearance, correct me constantly in front of friends, and subtly undermine anything I was proud of. When I landed a huge client at work, he said, "Wow, they must have been really desperate." If I made dinner, he'd tease me about the seasoning. "Good try, chef." If I wore something he didn't like, he'd ask if I was going through a phase. Classic narcissistic abuse, but I didn't see it then. Every time I questioned his behavior, he'd gaslight me. "You're being too sensitive. You're imagining things. You always twist everything I say." And just like that, I'd end up apologizing for getting hurt. He turned every confrontation into a loop, where he played the victim and I played the crazy girlfriend. Eventually I broke. One night, after a silent dinner and a passive-aggressive comment about my tone, I walked out. I packed a bag, went to my sister's place, and never looked back. I thought he'd fight for me, maybe beg or show some real remorse. Instead, he posted a cryptic quote on Instagram about losing people who were never real and started dating someone new within 2 weeks. That should have been the end of it. But Ethan had a problem with closure, especially when it wasn't his idea. He popped up randomly for the next year, liking old photos, sending "hope you're doing okay" texts, showing up at events he knew I'd be attending. He played it cool, like we were just friendly exes, but I knew better. He was keeping himself close enough to monitor me, to remind me he still existed, that he still had access. Then I met David. He was everything Ethan wasn't: steady, kind, emotionally secure. Where Ethan made me question myself, David made me feel grounded. He didn't play games. He didn't need to win arguments. He listened, he showed up, and after 2 years of building something real, he proposed. It was a quiet engagement, just us, a picnic in the park, and a small handwritten letter he read aloud. It was perfect. When I posted the photo of us holding hands with the ring, Ethan messaged me that night. "Wow, so soon?" I didn't reply. A week later, he messaged again. "Just hope he treats you better than I did. LOL. I blocked him, and that's when the real sabotage began. The first sign was subtle. An anonymous email sent to my work account. It was a poorly written message claiming I had lied about my credentials and shouldn't be trusted. The grammar was sloppy, and the sender used a fake address. HR dismissed it instantly, but I knew exactly who it came from. Then he started texting my friends. He reached out to my maid of honor, posing as concerned, saying he heard things about David and wanted to make sure I wasn't rushing into a mistake. She told him to buzz off, but he kept pushing. He DM'd one of my bridesmaids a link to an old article about David's high school arrest, something we had already talked about and moved past years ago. It was nothing serious, just teenage stupidity, but Ethan presented it like it was some dark secret. He was trying to create doubt, erode the foundation, twist the narrative, and when that didn't work, he went nuclear. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received an unmarked envelope at my apartment. Inside was a manila folder labeled, "Read this before you marry him." I opened it. Inside were fake screenshots of text messages, doctored ones, supposedly showing David texting another woman. There were fake receipts from hotel stays in a nearby city, suggesting he'd been cheating. It was so amateurishly done, I almost laughed. But then I remembered who I was dealing with. Ethan didn't need it to be believable. He just needed it to be damaging enough to make me panic, to make me hesitate, to plant a seed. But he had miscalculated. I wasn't the woman I was 3 years ago. I brought the folder straight to David. We sat down, went through every page, and dissected the inconsistencies. Fonts that didn't match, dates that were impossible, messages that sounded nothing like him. His response? Calm. Measured. "I know who this is from," he said. "We're not playing his game." That's when I knew I'd picked the right man. But it wasn't enough to survive Ethan's sabotage. I needed to end it. After that manila folder stunt, I realized Ethan wasn't just being petty, he was being strategic. This wasn't some random ex acting out. It was calculated sabotage. And the more I thought about it, the more I understood. He didn't actually want me back. He just couldn't stand the idea that I was happy without him, that I had moved on, that someone else had gotten everything he never appreciated. But if he wanted a war, he picked the wrong woman. I used to be afraid of Ethan's manipulations, the gaslighting, the fake concern, the little digs disguised as jokes, but not anymore. This time I wasn't going to react emotionally. I was going to fight back the way he never expected, by using the one thing narcissists fear most: exposure. I started by gathering evidence. First, the fake screenshots. I had David forward them to one of his friends in cybersecurity who owed him a favor. Within 24 hours, we had confirmation that the texts were doctored images pulled from an outdated SMS template, one no longer used on David's phone. The hotel receipts were even sloppier, stock invoice templates with logos pasted on top and pixel mismatches all over. Next, I pulled every message Ethan had ever sent since our breakup. I had screen recordings of DMS, archived texts, and voice notes. I even found a few emails he'd sent to my old college account trying to check in months earlier. He always had a habit of thinking he was the smartest person in the room, like no one would ever connect the dots if he left the trail long enough. Then came the harder part, the anonymous email to my work. That one had bounced from a spoofed domain, but with help from IT, I was able to narrow down the IP range to a location that just so happened to match a co-working space Ethan had posted about on Instagram months ago. Not airtight proof, but enough to raise eyebrows. I wasn't planning to take him to court or press charges. I didn't need to. I had a better idea. See, Ethan had always been obsessed with his image. He worked in PR for a mid-sized lifestyle brand and had recently started moonlighting as a branding coach on the side. He'd been building an online presence, posting reels about authentic storytelling and reputation management. It was laughable, really. The man who tried to destroy my relationship with fake cheating receipts was now marketing himself as a truth-teller. That was his real weak spot. So I built a file. I compiled everything: messages, voice recordings, timestamps, IP info, screenshots of his brand posts, and a detailed timeline of events. I didn't publish it. I didn't leak it to blogs. I didn't blast it on social media. That would have been too obvious and easily dismissed as a bitter ex lashing out. No, I sent it to the people who mattered to him. I started with the brand he worked for. I wrote a clean, concise email, attached the evidence, and included a short note. I thought you should be aware that one of your employees, Ethan, last name, has been engaging in a targeted campaign to harass and defame his ex-partner in the weeks leading up to her wedding. While this is a personal matter, his conduct reflects poorly on someone promoting your brand in public. I've attached documentation for your review. No emotion, no ranting, just facts. Then I sent a similar email to the PR firm he freelanced with, the 3 businesses he'd tagged as clients in his posts, and the director of a webinar where he'd recently been booked as a guest speaker. I didn't have to ask anyone to take action. They did it themselves. Within days, his name disappeared from the webinar promo page. His branding Instagram, where he posted daily motivational quotes, went from active to private. One of his so-called clients posted a cryptic update. "We do not endorse harassment or manipulation in any form. We've severed all ties with the individual previously listed." I stayed quiet, but I wasn't done. I created an anonymous Medium post titled, "When Narcissists Can't Let Go, a Case Study in Digital Harassment." I shared my story, not using his name, not even mine, but including just enough detail to make it clear to anyone who knew him exactly who it was about. I wrote about the gaslighting, the manipulation, the attempts to sabotage my wedding. I included blurred-out screenshots and excerpts from the "Read This Before You Marry Him" folder. The post gained traction. Not viral level, but enough that it was shared in a few private Facebook groups about toxic relationships and emotional abuse. Comments poured in from women who had experienced the exact same thing. A few even messaged me privately, saying they knew someone like this. One woman told me she'd dated Ethan 5 years earlier, and he had done something eerily similar to her before she moved away. That's when I realized it wasn't just me. This was his pattern. And now he was being recognized for it. Then came the final blow. A week before my wedding, I received a call from a mutual friend. She sounded breathless. "You are not going to believe this," she said. "Ethan's been suspended." Apparently, someone at his day job had shared the email I sent with HR, and while they hadn't fired him yet, they put him on a leave of absence while they investigated the harassment claims. He'd deleted his LinkedIn and stopped posting altogether. His side hustle? Dead. His clients? Gone. He had built his reputation like it was armor. I made sure it rusted from the inside. The wedding day arrived with clear skies, perfect lighting, and not a whisper from Ethan. He didn't show up, he didn't send a letter or try to crash the ceremony. For once, he stayed gone. Maybe because he knew if he pushed one step further, I'd name names and go fully public. Or maybe he just didn't have the energy to fake charm anymore. I married David in front of the people who loved us. No interruptions, no anxiety, just the peace of knowing that the chapter titled Ethan was finally, truly closed. But what made it even sweeter was that it didn't end with me walking away. It ended with the whole world seeing who he really was. I really thought that would be the end of it. After all the sabotage, the exposure, and the fallout, Ethan had finally gone quiet. He was off social media, removed from his clients' websites, and apparently suspended from his full-time job. My wedding had gone off without a hitch. I was officially married to a man who loved me, respected me, and never once made me question my own worth. For the first time in years, I felt free. And then Ethan tried to crawl out of the hole I put him in. I didn't hear from him directly, not at first. But about 2 months after the wedding, I got a message from a friend in marketing who shared a curious little podcast episode. "Thought this might interest you," she wrote, attaching the link. It was a new show about branding resilience, hosted by someone using the name E.J. Reeves. The voice? Definitely Ethan. He had changed just enough to sound unfamiliar. New branding, new slogan, a little more humility in his tone, but it was him. Same cadence, same fake empathy. The episode was titled, "How to Rebuild Your Reputation After Being Misunderstood." And yes, I cringed at that. I listened reluctantly. The entire episode was a masterclass in rewriting reality. He never said my name, never referenced the wedding or the emails, but he danced around it like a professional. "Sometimes people weaponize personal moments to destroy public credibility," he said. "I've been through that. I know what it's like to be judged by one side of a story." One side of a story, I nearly threw my phone. The way he framed it, he was the victim, not the man who falsified messages and tried to tank my relationship out of spite. No, he was just a guy trying to move forward after being painted as something he's not. But what really set me off was the end of the episode. He said, "There's freedom in truth. And if you just keep showing up with consistency and honesty, people will see you for who you really are." That was the last straw. You want people to see you for who you really are, Ethan? Done. I went back to the Medium post I had written months earlier. The anonymous one that had quietly circulated in private groups and forums. It had been viewed thousands of times, but it had never been tied to him publicly. It was powerful, but it still gave him wiggle room. It let him play the victim. So I revised it. I added a section, I included the podcast link, and this time, I named names. Not in a malicious way, not slanderous, not speculative, just facts. I laid out the timeline, I detailed the contents of the manila folder, I posted the receipt metadata, the text format discrepancies, the IP address tracing, and I included redacted screenshots, just enough to maintain privacy, but clear enough to show the manipulation. I also added a message to women reading, "If you've dealt with someone like this, someone who twists the truth and then calls it growth, please know you're not alone. I stayed silent to be the bigger person, but silence is how people like him survive. I'm done being silent." Then I published it. Under my real name. I didn't promote it. I didn't tag anyone. But the algorithm did its thing. Within a week, the updated article was being shared in branding forums, PR discussion boards, even LinkedIn circles. One of Ethan's former clients reposted it with the caption, "This is why vetting matters." The response? Swift and brutal. His podcast ratings tanked. Someone compiled a thread of all his old posts and cross-referenced them with timelines from the article. A TikTok creator who specializes in toxic branding did a 2-part video breaking down the case. By the time it hit Instagram, people were DMing me saying, "I had no idea he was the guy from that story." Neither did his new clients. One of them, an up-and-coming wellness brand, dropped him publicly, citing a conflict of integrity. Another said they had paused all campaigns pending a full ethics review. He tried to defend himself in a tweet. "Not everything you read online is true. People have their own motives." That tweet? Ratioed into oblivion. He deleted it in less than a day. Then he deactivated. Again. But this time, he didn't come back. And I wasn't done yet. You see, while all of that was happening, I was getting messages. From women. Some I didn't know, some I vaguely recognized from college parties or mutual friends. One woman told me Ethan used to date her roommate, and when she tried to end things, he started leaving anonymous notes on her car. Another said he warned her friends about her mental health after she blocked him. The patterns were identical. I encouraged them to share their stories. A few of them added their own voices to the article as anonymous contributors. Others wrote their own Medium posts. Within a month, his name was permanently tied to multiple accounts of manipulation and image sabotage. No threats, no lawsuits, just the truth. Documented, labeled, searchable, and just like that, his precious personal brand, unsalvageable. He'd spent years crafting an image of the relatable, polished, emotionally intelligent man who could elevate your messaging. Now his name triggered Google suggestions like Ethan Reeves fake texts, wedding sabotage medium, and narcissist case study. I had turned his greatest asset into a cautionary tale, and I never had to lie. I never had to scream. I just had to tell the story without flinching. The best part? I never had to explain any of it to David. He already knew. From the very beginning, he saw through Ethan, supported me when I felt unsure, stood by me while I gathered proof, built the timeline, and made every careful move. He was the quiet anchor behind every decision. And the night I showed him the final version of the article, he simply kissed my forehead and said, "That's the strongest thing you've ever done." I didn't disagree. There's a quiet that settles in when the chaos finally stops. At first, it feels unfamiliar. You keep waiting for another message, another attack, another shadow creeping in from your past. But then days turn into weeks, and nothing happens. No new accounts popping up, no late-night DMS, no cryptic quotes on Instagram meant to bait you back into the war. Just silence, and for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. Ethan was gone. Not just blocked, but exposed, disarmed, and, for once, seen for who he really was. There was no version of the story he could spin anymore. The image he'd curated so carefully, the reputation he believed made him untouchable, it had cracked beyond repair. Not because I shouted louder, but because I didn't let him shape the ending. I took that power back. But the real transformation, it didn't come from watching Ethan fall. It came from finally stepping into the life he told me I wasn't worthy of. I remember when we were still dating, Ethan used to mock the way I talked about love. He said I was too idealistic, that I watched too many rom-coms, that I needed to grow up and realize that relationships weren't supposed to be easy. He told me once, during an argument I hadn't even started, that some people just aren't cut out for being wives. And then he'd smiled, as if he were doing me a favor by keeping my standards low. Those words stayed with me for years. Even when I met David, even after he proposed, I still had moments where I wondered if Ethan had been right. Maybe I wasn't built for this. Maybe I was just playing dress-up with someone else's happy ending. But standing in front of the mirror on my wedding day, with my sister zipping up my dress and my mom dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, all those doubts fell away. Because I looked happy. Not performative happy. Not make it look good on Instagram happy. Real happy. And the woman staring back at me in the mirror? She didn't look like someone pretending. She looked like someone who had earned every ounce of joy that day held. The ceremony was everything I'd hoped for. Intimate, warm, honest. We wrote our own vows. David's hands shook slightly as he read his, and I cried halfway through mine. Our friends laughed, our parents hugged, and there wasn't a trace of fear or tension anywhere in the room. No drama. No sabotage, just love. Even after the wedding, I kept waiting for the dip people talk about, the post-wedding letdown, the stress of merging lives, the tiny cracks that start to show once the honeymoon glow wears off. But we didn't get that. We got closer. We built a home, not just a physical space, but a shared rhythm. Cooking dinner together, Sunday morning grocery runs, watching old movies under blankets on the couch. The little things that narcissists ruin because they think life is only about big gestures and control. Ethan never knew how to be still with me. David thrives in the stillness. It was in those quiet moments that I realized just how much healing I'd done, because for years I had learned to expect instability. I had learned to brace myself before speaking. I had learned to doubt my instincts. But now, I spoke without hesitation. I expressed needs without guilt. I could laugh at my own mistakes without feeling like I was handing someone ammunition. The damage Ethan left behind didn't just disappear, but it softened. I started therapy a few months after the wedding, not because anything was wrong, but because I wanted to understand just how deeply that relationship had affected me. My therapist helped me see the patterns, how I'd been trained to anticipate criticism, how I'd internalized blame, how I had equated emotional whiplash with passion. We worked through all of it, and as we did, something wild happened. I started hearing my own voice again, not the anxious, defensive version of me that Ethan had shaped, but the real one, the one that had gone quiet in order to survive. I heard her in the way I said no to things I didn't want, in the way I stood up for myself at work, in the way I stopped apologizing for taking up space. That was the revenge Ethan never saw coming, not the article. Not the public takedown. Me living well. Me unapologetically happy. Me getting everything he said I didn't deserve. And here's the thing about narcissists. They only understand wins and losses. To Ethan, the breakup had been a game. He had to win. He had to prove that I had lost something by leaving him, that no one else would love me better, that I'd come crawling back or at the very least remain haunted by him forever. Instead, I thrived. He lost me, and I never looked back. There's something poetic about seeing the contrast laid out so clearly. Ethan, who once mocked my ambitions, now hiding from Google search results. Me, building a future with a man who encouraged every dream I had. Ethan, ghosting from platform to platform, trying to resurrect a brand that no longer exists. Me, writing my story on my own terms and being heard. But maybe the most satisfying part? I never once called him names. I didn't sink to his level. I didn't lie or smear or scream. I didn't play victim. I just told the truth. Calmly, carefully, thoroughly. And in doing so, I became the kind of woman he feared the most. The one who didn't need his permission to move on. The one who didn't need his approval to heal. The one who didn't break when he tried to ruin her, but rose quietly and let the world watch him fall instead. Closure is a strange word. People throw it around like it's something you can buy, like it comes in a neat little package you can hand to yourself after a breakup, or a betrayal, or years of psychological warfare. But closure, at least in my case, didn't arrive wrapped in a final conversation or a dramatic confrontation. It came in small pieces, scattered across moments I didn't recognize as meaningful until much later. It came in the silence that followed the storm, in the mirror, in the quiet, in the ease of breathing freely again. Still, life has a funny way of circling back when you least expect it. It was a chilly Saturday in early spring when I saw Ethan again. Not planned, not wanted, just one of those uncomfortable flukes the universe tosses your way to see if you've really healed as much as you say you have. David and I were at a local art gallery, one of those small nonprofit spaces that showcases local talent and offers free wine with admission. I had a friend whose sister was presenting her first collection, and we figured it would be a nice low-key date night. I was wearing a navy coat and heeled boots, sipping from a plastic cup of Chardonnay, and squinting at a mixed media piece that looked like angry confetti. David was chatting with another couple by the hors d'oeuvres table. And then I heard it. His laugh. That laugh. Smug. Polished. Just a little too loud, like he wanted to be overheard. I turned before I could stop myself. There he was. Ethan. Standing a few feet away in a tailored coat, hair gelled back like always, holding a glass of red wine and smirking at something a young woman was saying. She looked half-interested, arms folded, nodding absently as he gestured at a painting like he was critiquing the Louvre. For a moment, my body responded before my brain could catch up. A flicker of tension in my stomach. That familiar adrenaline spike, the one you get right before a fight or a panic attack. My fingers tightened around the plastic cup, and I instinctively stepped behind the nearest pillar. But it passed, quickly. And what settled in its place was something colder, calmer, clarity. I didn't feel fear. I didn't even feel anger. I felt nothing for him. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but energetically. The way he moved, the way people didn't quite seem engaged in what he was saying, the way the young woman checked her phone mid-sentence. This wasn't the Ethan who had once felt magnetic and inescapable. This was a man trying to hold together the scraps of an image that had already been torn apart. And he hadn't seen me yet. I could have left. I could have turned around, grabbed David, and slipped out the side door, but something in me, call it instinct, call it evolution, call it defiance, told me to stay. Not to start anything, not to finish anything, just to be. So I stepped into the open again. I walked across the gallery with my shoulders back and head high. I approached David and slipped my hand into his, mid-conversation, smiling softly as he wrapped his fingers around mine. The other couple was laughing about a sculpture that looked vaguely like a melting couch. We all joined in. I nodded along, sipped my wine, and pretended not to notice the shift in the air. Because Ethan had finally seen me. I didn't have to look to know it. I could feel the static in the room, that sharp flicker of energy that told me his eyes were locked on the back of my head, struggling to decide whether to approach or slink away, whether to acknowledge the past or pretend it never existed. A minute later, he made his decision. He walked over. "Hey," he said, soft and casual, like we were old friends meeting by accident at a coffee shop. "Wow, you look different." I turned slowly, took my time, made sure he saw the full weight of my calm before I replied. "I'm married now," I said. "That'll do it." David looked between us, then at me, a silent question in his eyes. I gave a small nod. He understood. He didn't speak, just stood beside me like the grounded oak tree he always was. Ethan nodded too, lips pursed like he was chewing on something bitter. "I, heard about the wedding." I smiled politely. "Word gets around." There was a pause. One of those thick, uncomfortable silences that used to make me feel like I had to fill it, but not anymore. I let it stretch, let him squirm. He cleared his throat. "Listen, I just wanted to say, things got out of hand. I didn't mean for all of it to happen the way it did." "All of what, exactly?" I asked, tilting my head. His jaw tightened. You know what I mean. I didn't reply. I just waited. Ethan glanced at David, then back at me. It was a weird time. I wasn't in a good place, and I think you misunderstood some things I did. Ah, there it was. Even now, even here, he couldn't take responsibility without trying to reframe the narrative. He couldn't say sorry without suggesting that I had interpreted things incorrectly. You're right, I said. He blinked. What? You weren't in a good place, but I was, and I still am. Another silence. He looked like he wanted to say more, like he had practiced a monologue that suddenly didn't fit the moment. His eyes darted around, trying to find a footing he no longer had. And that's when I smiled. Not a smug smile, not a cruel one, just a quiet, genuine, peaceful smile. I hope you figure things out, I said. For real this time. Then I turned to David and said, Ready to check out that sculpture in the back? Definitely, he said. We walked away hand in hand and I never looked back. That was the last time I ever saw Ethan. I later heard that he left the gallery early, alone. I don't know what he's doing now. I don't care. He can rebrand 100 more times, host all the podcasts he wants, or change his name to something trendier. It doesn't matter. His story no longer intersects with mine. But mine? Mine is just getting started. I recently started a blog. Not to talk about Ethan, but to talk about recovery, about what it means to untangle yourself from someone who tried to consume you. I write about boundaries, about marriage, about rediscovering your voice. I've had women reach out saying it helped them leave their own Ethan. Some even shared their stories with me. It's become a little community, a space where women can speak without fear. Because when you've been through what I've been through, you realize that silence is what abusers count on. They count on shame, on fear, on self-doubt. And when you strip that power away, they disappear. I don't tell my story for pity. I tell it because I survived something I used to think would break me, and because I want other women to know that you can lose everything, your confidence, your voice, your sense of safety, and still get it all back. And when you do, the world feels different, lighter, safer, yours. If you had told me years ago that I would ever feel peace again, that I would fall asleep without rehearsing arguments in my head, that I would speak my mind without the tremble of second-guessing, that I would tell my story out loud and not feel ashamed, I wouldn't have believed you. Because when you live under the emotional thumb of someone like Ethan, peace feels like a fantasy, a reward that belongs to someone stronger, someone less gullible, someone who didn't fall for the charm, the manipulation, the gaslighting, someone who knew better. But here's what I've learned. Being manipulated doesn't mean you were weak. It means you were open, that you trusted, that you believed in people's ability to love you honestly. And that's not a flaw. That's not a reason for shame. That's something Ethan never understood. He thought my softness made me easy to control. But that softness? It's what made me strong enough to walk away. Strong enough to love again. Strong enough to take the truth and tell it with clarity. Strong enough to ruin his reputation without ever raising my voice. I never had to match his cruelty. I didn't have to smear his name with lies. I let the facts speak, and I let the facts be loud. And that's what I want anyone listening to this to remember. Healing doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means knowing exactly what happened and choosing to live a better life anyway. Ethan tried to destroy me in the most personal way possible. He didn't just try to ruin my wedding, he tried to poison the love I had finally found. He wanted me to doubt David, to doubt myself, to spiral back into the insecurity he had spent years feeding. But it didn't work, and when he realized it wouldn't, he panicked. Because narcissists need control, like oxygen, and when you stop reacting, when you stop explaining, when you stop giving them your energy, that's when they lose. Not in some explosive final battle, but in the slow, quiet collapse of their influence. That's what happened to Ethan. Not all at once, but gradually, as the lies unraveled, as the people around him saw the pattern, as the companies he worked with dropped him, not because I begged them to, but because they understood the risk of being attached to a man like him. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to burn anything down. I just told the truth one layer at a time, and now I'm free. Not the kind of free that means ignoring the past, but the kind that means I carry it differently. It no longer weighs me down. It's no longer a secret I tuck into the corners of my memory, hoping no one notices. It's a story. My story. And I own every part of it. My marriage is stronger because of it. David and I learned early on what resilience looks like. We learned how to protect each other, how to communicate even when things get messy. And most importantly, we learned that love isn't measured by grand gestures or Instagram-worthy moments. It's measured by consistency, by quiet support, by showing up even when it's uncomfortable. Sometimes I think back to the version of myself that dated Ethan, not with judgment, but with compassion. She didn't know yet how dangerous charm could be. She didn't know that sometimes people say the right things for the wrong reasons. She didn't know that love shouldn't come with terms and conditions. But she was brave enough to leave, brave enough to stay gone, and brave enough to rebuild her voice from scratch. And now, years later, I can say this with complete confidence. I am not the woman Ethan left behind. I am not his unfinished project. I am not his cautionary tale. I am my own victory. And he will never be the villain who broke me. He'll be the footnote in the story of how I found myself again. Because here's the thing, revenge doesn't always look like a dramatic reveal or a courtroom showdown. Sometimes revenge is quiet. It's steady. It's a life well lived in full view of the person who thought you'd never recover. I know for a fact that Ethan has seen my blog. Someone sent me a screenshot once. He had bookmarked a post about emotional abusers and reputation control. He hasn't said anything. He hasn't responded. But I know he read it. I know he saw the truth laid out without theatrics. And I hope it stings. Not because I want him to suffer, but because I want him to see that no matter how carefully he built his image, the truth still rose. That even when he thought he was 3 steps ahead, his own ego was what undid him. That the woman he once silenced now speaks for others. That's all the revenge I'll ever need. Because the real power isn't in ruining someone, it's in refusing to be ruined by them. I used to believe that when you share a dream with your best friend, it becomes stronger. That 2 people chasing the same vision would multiply the possibilities, not divide them. I really believe that. And I think that's what made her betrayal cut deeper than anything I've experienced. Because I didn't just lose a business connection, I lost someone I had considered family. Her name was Kayla. We met during our 2nd year of college at a women's entrepreneurship seminar hosted by a visiting alum. She sat next to me, complimented my shoes, and then spent the next 2 hours passionately taking notes with a pink fountain pen. We bonded over our love of journals, handmade candles, and our shared dream of building something we could call our own. At first, it was just casual conversation over coffee and campus walks, but by the end of the semester, we were talking daily. That friendship followed us into our post-grad years and eventually into adulthood. I was the type who kept a notebook for everything: sketches, formulas, names, ideas. Kayla was more digital. Spreadsheets, mood boards, Pinterest pins. We used to laugh at how opposite we were, but that's what made it work. I was the quiet brainstormer. She was the enthusiastic hype woman. I took pride in building things slowly, and she thrived on aesthetics and energy. After college, I moved to a nearby city and started working in marketing while freelancing on the side. I had this itch to create something with meaning, something that wasn't just a job. One night, while sipping chamomile tea in my tiny studio apartment, I scribbled down an idea in my notebook, a wellness brand that felt like coming home. It wouldn't be flashy or trend-chasing. It would be deeply personal, rooted in rituals, self-care, and healing. That's where the name came from: Root and Rise. The idea was that healing begins in the quiet, grounding moments, and from there, you rise. I told Kayla about it one night over FaceTime. Her eyes lit up like I'd just handed her a lottery ticket. "That's so you, Lena. It's soft, elegant, intentional, like real wellness, not just Instagram wellness." Her words meant everything to me at the time. I started developing products slowly, nothing crazy. I began with a calming bedtime kit, herbal-infused bath salts, a soy candle with lavender and vetiver, a handwritten affirmation card, and a mini journal. I made the first 50 kits by hand, labeling them with craft paper stickers and sealing each box with twine. Every order was packed in my tiny kitchen with care. When I got my first Etsy sale, I screenshotted it and sent it to Kayla. She responded with 10 emojis and a "You're doing it" caption that made me tear up. In the early days, she helped here and there, taking photos for my website, proofreading copy, even brainstorming product names with me over drinks. I didn't think twice about sharing my Google Drive folders or letting her sit in during a few vendor calls. She wasn't interested in starting her own thing back then, or so she said. Kayla told me repeatedly that she was just not cut out for the whole business owner thing, and that she was too impulsive to build something from scratch. I believed her. And because I believed her, I let her in on everything. I showed her my supplier list, my packaging sources, my pitch emails, even my wholesale pricing model. I considered her my creative sounding board. I'd send her mock-ups and she'd say things like, "Make the lavender a little less saturated, it should feel softer," or "Try adding a handwritten tag to the candle lid, that's more your vibe." Sometimes I joked that she was like my unpaid brand director. She laughed and told me I'd have to put her on the payroll one day. But there were signs, small things I ignored because I didn't want to ruin a good thing. Like the time she casually suggested I change the name of one of my products to something catchier, then used that exact name in a fake mock-up she made just for fun. Or the time I noticed she started following a bunch of the same business accounts I did and DMing vendors I had introduced her to. When I gently brought it up, she waved it off, saying she was just supporting the same community. Still, something felt off. The tension truly started to build when I landed my first big break. A boutique hotel downtown wanted to offer root and rise kits in their luxury suites. I had worked hard for that deal, emailing the wellness coordinator back and forth for months, sending samples, tweaking formulas. When they finally said yes, I cried on the phone with my mom, and naturally, I told Kayla first. She congratulated me, of course, texted a bunch of exclamation marks, and said she was so proud. But when we met for drinks that weekend, she seemed distracted. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and she kept steering the conversation toward her own work drama. When I brought up the hotel launch, she changed the subject within minutes. I chalked it up to stress. She was working a demanding job in event planning and had been feeling burned out. I figured she needed support too, so I didn't press. Meanwhile, Root and Rise kept growing. Orders trickled in steadily, and customer reviews were glowing. I started thinking about a proper relaunch, new packaging, new seasonal kits, a digital self-care ritual guide. I told Kayla all of it. She listened like always, nodding, asking questions, offering little bits of advice, and when I showed her a PDF of my ritual guide draft, she said it was so beautiful she could cry. I had no reason to doubt her. Why would I? This was my best friend, my sister in spirit. We had known each other for nearly a decade. We had seen each other through heartbreaks, job changes, bad dye jobs, and every flavor of existential crisis. She had been with me at my worst, and now she was witnessing my best. I didn't know it then, but I was handing her the entire blueprint. A month after the boutique hotel launch, I started planning my spring collection, the Rituals series, a set of 3 themed wellness boxes centered around personal growth. Each kit would include a candle, a scent roller, bath tea, and a digital audio guide I'd voice record myself. I spent weeks perfecting the formulas, ordering samples, reworking the branding. I sent Kayla a private Google Doc with all the packaging concepts and even asked her to give feedback on the meditation scripts. She was unusually slow to reply. When she finally did, she just said, "Looks really pretty," with a heart emoji. That was it. I remember feeling a strange emptiness when I read that message, like someone had removed the color from the page. It didn't make sense. She'd always been so engaged before. But again, I rationalized it. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe she had too much on her plate. But that emptiness didn't go away. It only grew. And it would all come crashing down just a few weeks later when a vendor I'd worked with messaged me out of nowhere and said, "Hey, I think someone's copying your stuff." The message came on a Tuesday afternoon, wedged between a shipping notification and a coupon code email. I almost didn't open it. It was from one of my early vendors, someone I hadn't worked with in months but had always liked. The subject line just said, "Hey, not sure if this is you?" And the preview text cut off after a few words. I clicked it casually, thinking maybe they'd spotted one of my products in a store or had a question about a past invoice. But the message was short, and the moment I read it, my hands went cold. "Just wanted to check. Saw this brand launch on IG and the stuff looks really familiar. Thought it might be a rebrand of yours, but wasn't sure. Hope all is good." There was a screenshot attached. I opened it and stared for a long time before I realized I had stopped breathing. The image showed a sleek Instagram page with soft, earthy tones and minimalist captions. The brand name was Glownest. The photo featured a wellness box, a candle, a scent roller, a handwritten card, and bath tea arranged in a flat lay. The label design was nearly identical to mine. Same off-white labels, same serif font, even the same use of craft paper as the backdrop. But the real shock came when I looked at the product names. One of the kits was called Reclaim, another Begin Again. Those were the exact names I had been working on for my upcoming Rituals series. They weren't even live on my site yet. I hadn't announced them publicly. The only person I'd shared them with was Kayla. My stomach dropped. For a few seconds, I just sat there, blinking at the screen, as if somehow the image would change or correct itself. I refreshed the tab. Nothing changed. I clicked through to the Instagram account. It had just launched a few days earlier and already had hundreds of followers. There were 4 posts, all perfectly styled, clearly shot by someone who understood my aesthetic. In one of the captions, I saw the phrase, "intentional ritual space," and I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. That was my language. I had written that in my ritual guide. I checked the links in the bio and found a site that was still under construction, but the placeholder image was unmistakably a repackaged version of my own homepage design. I didn't know whether to scream or cry. I called Kayla immediately, but it went to voicemail. I texted her, "Hey, can we talk? Something weird just came up," and watched the message sit unread for hours. When she finally replied later that night, it was a vague, "Sorry, long day. Everything okay?" I stared at those 4 words for a long time. Everything was not okay. But I didn't want to accuse her over text. I needed to hear her voice. So I asked if she could talk. She said she was tired and had a work deadline. I told her it was important. She didn't respond again that night. The next morning, I opened Instagram again and checked the Glownest page. There were 2 new posts. One showed a close-up of the packaging, a box sealed with a wax stamp I had sourced from an Etsy shop I'd shared with her months ago. The other was a quote graphic. "Ritual is the art of honoring your breath." That was a line from my private journal. I had written it as part of a meditation script that I had let Kayla review. The realization settled over me like a fog. She hadn't just copied me, she had stolen from me. Word for word, item for item, idea for idea. And she had done it while pretending to cheer me on. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she had been inspired and didn't realize how close it was. Maybe it was just one overlapping idea. But the more I looked, the more blatant it became. She had lifted my entire concept and presented it as her own. I checked the Glownest domain registration. It had been purchased 2 months earlier, the same week I had sent her the PDF with my spring kit names and descriptions. I felt sick. I messaged the vendor who had emailed me and thanked them. They replied almost immediately and said they had assumed it was a new brand I was launching under a different name. When I told them it wasn't, they apologized profusely and said they wouldn't work with Glownest moving forward. That small victory meant little in the moment. I felt like I had been gutted. I spent the rest of the day digging. I searched Glownest's content, tracked which vendors were tagged, and even ran the site through a metadata checker. The structure matched mine almost exactly. Even the email template was a reworked version of the newsletter I had been sending for months. It was like looking into a funhouse mirror, everything distorted but unmistakably mine. I reached out to another vendor I had recommended to Kayla, pretending to be a curious new brand doing market research. I asked if they were working with any wellness box companies and if they'd done any recent custom orders. They replied that they had just completed a rush order for a company called Glownist, and even mentioned that the founder had been inspired by a friend's brand but wanted to go in her own direction. I stared at those words. Inspired by a friend. My friend. Me. That night I cried in a way I hadn't since I lost my grandmother. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the feeling of being erased, of having poured my heart into something only for someone else to slap a new label on it and call it theirs. I felt stupid for trusting her, humiliated for missing the signs, and enraged that she could pretend to support me while planning this behind my back. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't even open my own website without feeling violated. I considered confronting her directly. Part of me wanted to show up at her apartment and demand answers, but something stopped me. Not fear. Strategy. If Kayla was willing to steal from me so openly, then she was probably arrogant enough to think she could get away with it. And if that was true, then she wouldn't expect me to be quiet. She'd expect me to blow up, to act emotionally, to rant on social media or send threats. That's how she could frame herself as the victim of a jealous friend. But if I didn't react, if I played the long game, then I could control the outcome, and control was exactly what she had taken from me. I was going to take it back. I started by documenting everything. I screen-recorded the Glownist Instagram page, took time-stamped screenshots of all the product listings, and archived every email and file I had ever sent Kayla. I wrote out a full timeline of our interactions, complete with date-stamped file versions from my Google Drive. I even contacted a friend who worked in intellectual property law and asked if I had any legal options. She told me that while it would be hard to sue over general product similarities, the copied names and brand phrases could be grounds for a cease and desist if I could prove prior use. It wasn't a full solution, but it gave me hope. Over the next few days, I kept watching as Glownist began teasing a major self-care weekend launch event. Kayla had partnered with several influencers, some of whom I had worked with before, and was offering a Founder's Wellness Ritual box as a limited release. I clicked the event link and saw the full kit contents. It was my Rituals series. Every item, every name, every description. She hadn't even changed the candle scent. I felt a strange calm wash over me. She wasn't being careful. She wasn't being clever. She was being lazy, and that would be her downfall. I didn't need to expose her yet. All I had to do was wait. The day I decided to get even wasn't some dramatic moment where I screamed into the mirror or vowed revenge out loud. It was quiet, like turning a key in a lock. I woke up that morning still exhausted, still sad, but with a new kind of stillness inside me. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and pulled up Glownist's Instagram for what must have been the 100th time. The comments were piling up. People were tagging their friends, complimenting the new brand's aesthetic, asking when the boxes would be available. And there, buried in the replies, was Kayla responding like a true founder, gracious, humble, completely fake. That's when it clicked. She was wearing a mask that I had helped her paint, and I was done letting her parade around in it. She wanted a business? Fine. She could have a lesson in how real business works. I started by locking down my own house. I removed all shared folders from our old Google Drive links. I changed the passwords on my vendor accounts, design apps, and site dashboards. I went through every shared file I'd ever sent her and made sure she couldn't access them again. Then I updated my Root and Rise website to remove anything she'd copied word for word, rewriting descriptions and adjusting phrasing while preserving the original spirit. If she wanted to play copycat, I'd make sure she was chasing a moving target. Then came the strategic moves. First, I reached out to the hotel that had stocked my kits and casually asked how their customers had been responding. They said the feedback had been amazing and that they were planning to place a spring reorder. I offered them an exclusive early version of my next series, customized scents, embossed labels, and a printed guidebook. They were thrilled. That was one less account Kayla could poach if she ever tried. Next, I reconnected with my original packaging vendor, the same one Kayla had ordered from under her own name. I told them what happened, not in a dramatic way, just plainly. I showed them the copied designs and my older order history. They were shocked and disappointed. Out of respect, they offered to pull any upcoming Glownist orders from the queue. I told them no, I didn't want to interfere with her production. I just wanted them to know the truth. What mattered more was what came next. I ordered double the amount of packaging supplies I usually did, enough to restock my current kits and launch the Rituals series ahead of schedule. Then I reached out to a handful of newer vendors I had been eyeing for future projects. I didn't mention Kayla, I just presented my brand, my values, and some beautiful updated mock-ups. Every single one said yes. I still hadn't spoken to Kayla. She hadn't reached out either, and I didn't expect her to. She probably thought she'd won, that I was too stunned or too timid to fight back. And honestly, I think she wanted me to disappear quietly, to avoid the awkward confrontation and give her space to grow her vision. But that's the thing about people who build castles on sand. They never think the tide will come. With my supply chain secure and my kits updated, I turned to the clients. I made a list of every influencer, affiliate, or brand partner I had worked with over the past year. Some were big names with thousands of followers. Others were small creators who had supported me early on. I reached out one by one, not with a mass email, but with personalized messages explaining that I was relaunching with upgraded products and would love their feedback. I didn't mention Kayla. I didn't have to. A few had already seen Glownist online and messaged me privately saying, "Hey, is this—" I confirmed their suspicions, calmly and factually, and shared my timeline of development. Most were horrified. One told me she had received a gifted PR box from Glownist and felt sick to her stomach after realizing it was my concept rebranded. She posted a subtle story the next day holding one of my old kits with the caption, "Real recognizes real." It didn't go viral, but it didn't have to. In the niche wellness community, people notice subtleties. Whispers spread fast. I kept things professional. No name-calling, no subtweets, no drama. I just kept creating. And while I was building momentum, Kayla was overconfidently laying the groundwork for her launch weekend. The event was called the Self-Care Reset Weekend, complete with live streams, a founder Q&A, mini workshops with guest creators, and an exclusive product drop. The promotional page was polished, if a little hollow. The language mimicked the tone I'd always used, intimate, slow-paced, almost meditative. But something about it rang false, like a copy of a copy. She was offering bundles, early bird discounts, a subscriber giveaway. It looked impressive on the surface. I wasn't worried. I knew how this worked. The thing about digital launches is that perception is everything, but sustainability is what keeps a brand afloat. Kayla had perception on her side, for now. But she had no roots, no real relationships with vendors, no loyalty from clients. She hadn't put in the time to build trust because she thought branding alone was enough. She underestimated what it meant to actually deliver on a promise. So I kept working. I brought back some of my most loyal customers with handwritten thank you notes and surprise discounts. I collaborated with 2 small creators to develop content around the rituals in my new kits. No big campaigns, just authentic, thoughtful partnerships. I released a soft relaunch email with a message about resilience, growth, and creativity. Again, no name dropping, no drama. Just a message from the heart. I knew the people who mattered would feel it. A week before Kayla's launch, I quietly released my Reclaim kit, a month earlier than planned. It sold out in 48 hours. That weekend I watched Glownist's countdown clock hit 0. The launch began with a live stream. I didn't join it. I didn't need to. Within an hour, the stream was glitching. The audio cut out. One of the guest speakers was a no-show. The chat was filled with people asking for links that didn't work or complaining about delays. Someone asked why the kit looked so similar to another brand they followed. A moderator deleted the comment, but not before a few others chimed in agreeing. By that night, Kayla's Instagram comments had noticeably slowed. The posts were still going up, but the energy was off. Influencers she had tagged weren't resharing the content. A few quietly removed their early posts. A client I had worked with in the past messaged me and said, "Her launch looked like yours, but with none of the soul." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because by then, my relaunch had picked up real traction. People were posting unboxings, tagging their friends, writing about how my kits felt like home and helped them start fresh. And most importantly, they were sharing the story behind the brand, my story, the one Kayla couldn't fake. I knew I had struck a nerve when I got a notification that Glonist's Instagram bio had changed. The phrase "inspired by authentic rituals" was removed. The new version was cold and corporate. It was the first sign of panic. But I didn't stop. I launched the second kit in the Rituals series, Begin Again. This time, I included a short audio guide with my own voice-walking customers through a morning journaling ritual. It was simple, honest, and personal. I offered it as a bonus to returning customers. Feedback poured in. People said it felt like I was in the room with them, reminding them to slow down. One person emailed me saying it had become her daily anchor through a difficult divorce. That message alone reminded me why I had started in the first place. And through all of this, Kayla never reached out. Not a word, not even a denial. Maybe she thought if she stayed quiet long enough, it would blow over. Maybe she was too proud to admit what she'd done, or maybe she was too ashamed. Either way, I wasn't waiting for an apology. I had already moved on to building something bigger. Because revenge, when done right, isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about knowing your worth so deeply that no one else can take it from you, not even someone you once called your best friend. The funny thing about watching someone try to build an empire out of borrowed bricks is that eventually the cracks begin to show. They can paint over them, rearrange the structure, call it something new. But those foundations were never theirs to begin with. And by the time Kayla's launch weekend actually began, those cracks weren't just showing, they were caving in. It started with the live stream. I didn't tune in immediately, but one of my old brand collaborators, Alana, messaged me that afternoon with a screenshot and the words, "Girl, what is going on here?" The image showed a frozen frame from Kayla's event. The lighting was bad, the audio looked out of sync, and the comments were a chaotic flood of questions and complaints. Curious, I opened Instagram and clicked into the live. By then, it had been going for about 40 minutes. The chat was full of people asking where the link was to purchase, saying they hadn't received their RSVP emails, or that they had trouble checking out. Others were asking why the ritual box looked familiar and whether she'd partnered with another brand. A few influencers were trying to moderate the chat, deleting comments or redirecting attention back to Kayla, but the energy was all wrong. People were restless, confused, suspicious. Kayla herself looked off. She had always been confident in front of a camera, naturally bubbly and full of charm, but this time her smile didn't reach her eyes. She seemed rushed, rehearsed. She stumbled over product names and kept glancing at something off-screen, like she was being coached. At one point, she mispronounced the word vetiver, a key ingredient in the candle she claimed to have personally formulated. That was when I knew. She hadn't just copied me. She didn't even understand what she had stolen. I watched in silence as she tried to recover. She pivoted to talk about the mission behind Glonist, using the same buzzwords I had once scribbled into my first journal: ritual, intention, slow healing. Words that had come from my late nights, my personal experience, my own healing. They sounded hollow coming from her mouth. Not because they weren't good words, but because they didn't belong to her. She had memorized a language she didn't speak. The next day, I kept an eye on the Glonist website. The product pages were up now, but the load times were slow. Someone must have set up the back end poorly because half the product images weren't displaying correctly. Clicking through to checkout brought up a payment error screen more than once. I knew this not because I tried to buy anything, but because a handful of customers messaged me thinking Glonist and Root and Rise were the same brand. They told me they were trying to support the original and were confused about which one to order from. That's when I realized just how thin her copycat branding really was. If people couldn't tell who was who, it meant she hadn't created anything distinct. She'd just taken what I had and removed the name. To fix the confusion, I posted a quiet message on my own website. I updated my FAQ page to explain the inspiration behind my Rituals series, with links to archived launch dates, customer reviews, and vendor partnerships that predated Kayla's business. It was factual, professional, and calm. I didn't name names, I didn't stir the pot, I simply told the truth. And people listened. Later that week, I received a DM from one of the influencers Kayla had partnered with. She said she felt blindsided. She had promoted the launch on her page, only to have several of her followers comment that the kits looked eerily similar to mine. When she asked Kayla privately about it, Kayla brushed her off and claimed that ritual kits were just a trendy thing everyone was doing. But when the influencer dug deeper and saw my post, she realized she had unknowingly promoted a knockoff. She apologized to me, even though she didn't have to, and quietly pulled her promo posts down. From there, the unraveling happened fast. Kayla posted a thank you graphic the day after her launch with a vague caption about technical hiccups and learning in real time. But the comments weren't kind. People asked why she hadn't responded to customer emails, why the kit was back-ordered, and why the product names were nearly identical to another small brand. The more she tried to ignore the noise, the louder it became. A TikTok creator even stitched a video showing screenshots of both brands' kits side by side, pointing out the overlaps. It got over 50,000 views in a day. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I launched my second Rituals series kit, Begin Again, with a guided morning meditation and a printable journal prompt set. It sold out in a week. Customers were tagging me in stories, calling the experience soothing, grounding, and exactly what they needed to reset. One even wrote a blog post about how the kit helped her rebuild her morning routine after burnout. That post got picked up by a wellness newsletter, and my traffic spiked overnight, not because I paid for ads or chased trends, but because people connected with something real. I think what hit Kayla hardest wasn't the criticism. It was the silence from the people she had counted on. The influencers who didn't repost, the vendors who stopped responding, the community she tried to build that didn't trust her. Her stories became less frequent, her posts turned defensive. At one point, she uploaded a carousel explaining the inspiration behind Glownist and how rituals belong to everyone. It was vague and performative and immediately backfired. The comments flooded with people asking why she hadn't addressed the accusations or acknowledged where the designs had come from. Others started tagging my account directly. And still, I said nothing. That was the most powerful part. I didn't have to tear her down. She was doing it herself, one misstep at a time. All I had to do was keep showing up for the people who supported me, the people who knew the difference. I responded to every customer email. I packed every order with care. I kept creating. I started developing my third Ritual series kit, Release, with a scent blend inspired by my grandmother's garden and a handwritten letter about grief and letting go. It was the most personal thing I had ever made, and I poured my heart into it. Then came the email. It arrived one night at 11:47 p.m. The subject line was just, "I'm sorry." It was from Kayla. I hovered over it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a long message, over 1,000 words, explaining how she had felt stuck in her life, how she had admired my passion, how she never intended to hurt me, but got swept up in the excitement of finally starting something. She admitted that she had used my files, my ideas, my designs. She said she thought I would be flattered, that I would understand, that she didn't think I would fight her on it, that she had never expected it to blow up in her face. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just said she wanted me to know. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, though I was, and not because I didn't have words, though I had plenty, but because the story was already over. Her launch had failed, her reputation was bruised, and most importantly, she had to live with the truth that she didn't build anything of her own. No apology would undo what she had taken from me, but more than that, it couldn't take away what I had rebuilt in its place. I closed the email, deleted it, and went back to work on my next kit. In the weeks that followed Kayla's failed launch, things gradually settled into a strange calm. My business was flourishing in ways I hadn't imagined possible a year ago. The traffic to my site had nearly doubled since the release of the Begin Again kit, and I had quietly expanded to include a few boutique stockists who had reached out after seeing my story shared on social media. But what surprised me most wasn't the success. It was how peaceful I felt despite everything that had happened. The betrayal, the grief, the anger, they hadn't vanished, but they no longer owned me. They sat somewhere behind me, distant and quiet, like closed doors I no longer needed to open. But one door did creak back open, unexpectedly, and in a way that forced me to confront everything I had pushed aside. I was invited to speak on a panel at a local wellness fair. It was one of those community-led events organized by small businesses and hosted at a trendy downtown co-op. I almost declined when I saw the email. Public speaking had never been my comfort zone, and I worried about stepping too far into the spotlight, but something nudged me to say yes. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was healing, maybe it was both. The event wasn't huge, but it was beautifully done. There were fairy lights strung between the booths, handmade banners with floral calligraphy, and the scent of lavender drifting through the air from a soap vendor a few stalls over. I had a small table tucked between a tea blender and a local yoga instructor. I brought a sample of each of my Rituals series kits and a printed lookbook showing the evolution of Root and Rise from its early days to now. People stopped to talk, asked questions, signed up for my newsletter. Some even told me they'd heard about me through that situation online and had been rooting for me ever since. It was humbling in the best way, not because I wanted to be pitied, but because I had been seen. My panel slot was late in the afternoon. The topic was Building with Intention, Staying Authentic in a Saturated Market. As I sat backstage waiting to be introduced, I glanced through the panelist list on the event brochure and froze. There it was, printed right above mine in clean serif font, Kayla Andrews, founder, Glownist. My stomach turned. She wasn't just attending, she was speaking. She had a booth. She was here. I hadn't seen her in person since before the launch. I didn't even know she was still actively running Glownist. I had stopped checking her page weeks ago. Everything inside me wanted to leave, to quietly pack up my table and slip out before our paths crossed. But I didn't. I stayed seated. I breathed. I reminded myself that I didn't owe her fear, avoidance, or shame. She had taken enough from me. She didn't get this too. The panel before ours ended and we were ushered backstage. There were 5 of us total, all small business owners at different stages in their journeys. I stepped onto the stage with my heart thudding so loudly I could hear it in my ears, and then I saw her. Kayla. Sitting at the far end of the panel table, wearing a linen jumpsuit and an overly calm expression. Her hair was pinned back, and she held a stainless steel water bottle with one of those motivational stickers on it. Progress, not perfection. She glanced at me once, no nod, no acknowledgement, just a flicker of recognition, and then back to her notes. The moderator introduced us one by one. When she got to me, she mentioned my mindful approach to brand building and my commitment to slow rituals and customer-centered growth. The audience clapped politely. Kayla shifted in her seat. The questions started simple. What inspired our brands? What challenges we had faced? What advice we'd give to new creators? I answered honestly, talking about my early mistakes, the learning curve of sourcing sustainably, and the importance of building trust before building hype. When Kayla spoke, her voice was steady but rehearsed. She talked about resilience, creative burnout, and finding your voice after failure. The irony wasn't lost on me. At one point, the moderator asked, "How do you stay true to your vision when others are doing similar things around you?" A subtle but pointed question, the kind that makes you shift in your seat even if your conscience is clear. Kayla paused before answering. "I think we have to remember that ideas are collective," she said. "We're all pulling from the same cultural threads. What matters is how we bring our own stories to the work." She said it with a smile, but her eyes flicked toward me, and for a brief second, I saw the mask slip. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to know she was still hiding. When it was my turn, I didn't take the bait. I didn't mention her. I didn't defend myself. I simply said, "There's something sacred about building from your own center. When your work is born from your lived experience, it resonates in a way that trends can't replicate, and the people who are meant to find it will." There was a pause after I spoke, then applause. Not thunderous, not dramatic, just real. After the panel, attendees came up to chat. A few thanked me for my words. A young woman asked if she could shadow me sometime to learn about ethical sourcing. Kayla stood across the room at her booth, pretending to be absorbed in a conversation with another vendor. I saw her glance my way once, then look down. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. Later, when I walked past her booth on my way out, I noticed something that made me stop. Her display was beautiful, visually anyway. The colors were soft, the layout clean, but the table was untouched. No customers, no conversations, no spark. It looked like a showroom with no audience. I glanced down at one of her boxes and saw the new names she'd given the kits, different from mine now, but hollow. Words like glow time and reset box. They sounded trendy but empty. I didn't feel anger or smugness. I just felt done. As I stepped into the evening air, the sun casting a soft glow over the city streets, I realized that closure doesn't always come in the form of an apology or a confrontation. Sometimes it comes in the quiet assurance that you stayed true to yourself when it would have been easier to fight dirty, that you didn't need to scream to be heard, that you didn't need to destroy someone else to rebuild yourself. I went home that night and lit one of my own candles. I took a long bath, just like I used to during those early days when Root and Rise was just an idea scribbled in a notebook, and I felt at peace, not because the pain was gone, but because I was stronger than it. A few months had passed since the wellness fair, and life had taken on a rhythm I hadn't realized I was missing. It wasn't just that my business was doing well, it was that I was doing well. I wasn't waking up with anxiety in my chest or constantly refreshing social media, waiting for the next blow. I was sleeping better, laughing more. Even the people around me noticed. My mom commented one afternoon while we were having tea, saying, "You look like yourself again." And she was right. For the first time in a long while, I did. Root and Rise had evolved into something bigger than just a product line. It had become a sanctuary, for me, for my customers, and for the small but strong community we had built together. Each time I released a new kit or shared a journal prompt online, people engaged not just with the products but with the values behind them. They weren't just buying a box, they were investing in a mindset. And that, more than anything, made me feel like I had truly won. But then something happened that brought everything full circle. I received a message from a vendor I hadn't worked with in over a year. A high-end wellness retreat company that I'd tried to partner with before, back when I was still learning the ropes. At the time, they'd passed on my proposal, saying the market was too saturated. Now, they were reaching out to ask if I was still open to collaboration. Apparently, they'd seen my new rituals series featured in a digital magazine and loved the direction I'd taken. The article had praised my quiet resilience and unwavering originality in a space cluttered by imitation. I said yes without hesitation. The retreat partnership became a cornerstone moment for Root and Rise. They ordered a custom collection for their clients, limited edition boxes with personalized guided rituals based on the retreat themes. I designed everything from the scent profiles to the packaging insert. It was the most complex project I'd ever done, and I poured my entire heart into it. When the launch finally happened, the reviews were overwhelming. One guest even wrote in her feedback, "This kit didn't just feel like a gift, it felt like someone had seen what I needed before I even said it." That was when I knew I had not only recovered from Kayla's betrayal, I had risen above it. And speaking of Kayla, she didn't disappear. She didn't apologize again either, but her business, Glownist, began to fade. Slowly at first, like a party everyone forgot to attend. The posts became sporadic. The tone grew defensive. Her captions turned into long-winded reflections about creative fatigue and learning curves. Eventually, someone tagged me in a post that said Glownist was on hiatus. I checked her page. There were no new product launches, no engagement from past collaborators, just a lingering feed of perfectly filtered photos, now starting to look a bit desperate in their polish. But the real ending came when a mutual acquaintance reached out. Someone from the creative co-op where Kayla and I had once worked on vendor pitches together. She told me gently that Kayla had quietly tried to rebrand under a new name, reaching out to influencers under a different label. But word travels fast in small circles, and her past caught up with her. No one wanted to promote a copycat, especially not one who had never taken public accountability. Still, I didn't celebrate her downfall. I didn't screenshot the messages or forward them to mutual friends. I didn't post a cryptic story or write a takedown thread. I had no desire to play in the mud. Not because I was trying to be noble, but because I had outgrown the version of myself who needed to prove anything to her. Instead, I focused on building the life she tried to mimic but couldn't sustain. I invested in brand mentorship programs to help new creators find their own voices. I created a small scholarship for women entrepreneurs starting handmade wellness businesses, especially those who couldn't afford fancy designers or flashy marketing. I used my experience as fuel, not for revenge, but for purpose. One day, while cleaning out a drawer in my studio, I found the original sketchbook I had used when developing Root and Rise. The pages were filled with hand-drawn logos, pressed flower petals, notes written in the margins like, "Try lavender plus sandalwood," or "Create space for real pause." In the back was a list titled, "Why I'm Doing This." It read, "To create something honest, to offer peace in a world that doesn't stop, to be part of someone's quiet healing, to remember who I am, to never let someone steal my light again." I smiled at that last line, because they had tried. Oh, they had tried. But light can't be stolen when it's coming from within. It only grows stronger with time, with truth, and with the kind of love that shows up quietly every single day. Months later, I received a letter, not an email, a real letter, hand-addressed and tucked inside a pale pink envelope. It was from Kayla. Inside was a single page, no excuses, no long explanations, just this: "I thought I could become something by imitating someone brave, but you were brave because you didn't take shortcuts. You built something I couldn't fake. I hope someday I do the same. I'm sorry for everything." I read it twice. Then I tucked it into the back of that sketchbook and placed it on the shelf, not as a trophy, not as a wound, but as a chapter that had finally, truly ended. Today, when people ask me how I built Root and Rise, I tell them it started with a box, but it grew because I refused to be boxed in. I didn't let betrayal define me. I didn't let imitation shake me. I let the storm pass, and when the dust settled, I was still standing, stronger, clearer, and rooted in something no one could steal. So if you ever find yourself betrayed by someone you trusted, if someone steals what you've poured your soul into, don't panic. Don't burn down your work in grief or shrink away from the world. Just get quiet, get focused, and then build something so powerful that even the people who tried to break you have no choice but to watch you shine. Because the sweetest revenge isn't rage, it's rising,